All right, with no further me sitting up here acting weird, we're going to let, obviously we have Dr. Ben Carson coming up next to do his introduction. To do his introduction is Mark Wall. He is Ben Carson's South Carolina Evangelical Coalition leader. So you'll want to look him up once you get done here. Mark?
Amen. Thank you so much. Good morning, everybody. I pray that you are ready to hear the man that I want to be president more than anybody else. Listen, I know that he introduced me as the Evangelical Coalition leader. Now, that's a fancy title for I'm a pastor, and I live in the upstate of South Carolina, and what I'm here to do is just talk to people of faith. How many people of faith do I have in the room? Let me hear you. Amen. There you go. Look, hallelujah, brother. Listen, what we need to do is to ensure that people of faith do not stay home this time, okay? Can I get an amen on that? You have more outreach, and I've been doing a lot of reading, and you know, you guys in the Tea Party, you're like David and Goliath. You hear me? You guys are coming up against him and defeating Goliath, and the way that you do that is making sure that you're ready and prepared. And you've taken all the steps necessary. And I know one other guy who has taken those steps, and believe me when I tell you, this guy had no aspirations to go into politics, okay? Come on. If you were a retired neurosurgeon, wouldn't you want to retire and do the things that you've looked forward to your whole life? Absolutely. But then the Lord, okay? I'm a pastor, I just got to say it. When God starts dealing with you about the state of our nation, and you're listening to him, you have no choice but to respond. And the thing that Ben Carson has done is respond. Dr. Carson, I have seen around the state, and I promise you, what you see here today, I have seen from him every time I've been with him. He is not one of those people that is up one day, down one day. He's stable. And the thing that I like the most about him is that he thinks things through before he responds, okay? Amen. We need a thinker in Washington, D.C., and not someone who's just going to stand there and make rash decisions just so they can have the next reality TV show, okay? We don't need that in the White House. Ladies and gentlemen, you came here today to see the man that I hope will be the next president of the United States, and it is my great pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Ben Carson.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. It is a great pleasure to be here with you today. Normally my wife Candy is with me, but she's over in Columbia, South Carolina today. She's become quite a campaigner, I must admit, which is pretty surprising because when I first started this endeavor, I mean, she was not at all enthusiastic about this. I mean, she was looking forward to, you know, retirement, relaxation. You know, we bought a beautiful home in a country club right on the 17th hole. We were just going to enjoy life. But, you know, when we had our two little granddaughters, it completely changed her mind. You know, she looked into those innocent little faces and recognized what was going to happen. And let me just take this opportunity to thank members of the Tea Party for being willing to take a stand. As I wrote in my book, America the Beautiful, if America is going to be saved, a large part of that is going to have to be from the Tea Party. And the Tea Party has been demonized. And yet, all they are patriotic Americans who said, don't we have something to say about what happens in our country? That's all they are, you know? And it is an amazing country. You know, there was all this hoopla last week about the lottery and $1.5 billion. Well, you know what? I already won the lottery because I was born in America and I know the Lord, you know? So I don't know how it gets a lot better than that. You know, this is an amazing country that we live in. And, you know, the people who say that it's not exceptional, I don't think they know history. I don't think they know what's happened during the history of the world. For 100 years, 500 years, 1,000, 5,000 years before America came on the scene, people did things the same way. Within 200 years of the advent of America, men were walking on the moon. It changed the trajectory of mankind. It's the most exceptional nation the world has ever known. And it's absolutely ridiculous for anybody to say anything else. And it's so important that we preserve that exceptionalism for those who are coming behind us, our children. You know, this is the first generation that's not expected to do better than their parents. What does that say about what's going on in our nation and why we need to be very concerned? There are those who say it's the new norm. There is nothing normal about this, you know. It is because there are people who are destroying the future for our children. You know, I look at, you know, the way that we spend money. You know, I grew up very poor, but we did learn, particularly from my mother, that you don't spend what you don't have. And, you know, she was very thrifty. You know, she would go to the Goodwill and buy a pair of pants with a big hole in the knee, back before that was fashionable, and put patches on both knees, and everybody was saying, "Where'd you get those from?" You know, she just had practical common sense, and that seems to be something that's missing these days. I don't think there are any of our problems that cannot be resolved with common sense as long as you remove ego and politics. Those are the things that destroy everything. And you know, a lot of people said to me, "Are you sure you want to get into the political arena? That's a nasty cesspool of stuff." Yes, it is a nasty cesspool. And no, I didn't want to get into it. But, you know, I felt directed in that way. And all the pundits were saying, it's impossible. An outsider with no connections to Washington. It's impossible. You can't do it. You can't raise the money. You can't put together the organization. Forget about it. And I was actually comforted to hear that because I didn't want to do it anyway. But, but I finally said, "Lord, if you really want me to do this, then you have to open the doors. And if you open the doors, I will walk through them." And he opened the doors. So, because I believe that there are a lot of people in our country who actually still are people of faith. You stop and you think about this. Our founding document, the Declaration of Independence, talks about certain inalienable rights given to us by our Creator, a.k.a. God. The Pledge of Allegiance to our flag says we are one nation under God. Many courtrooms on the wall it says, "In God we trust." Every coin in your pocket, every bill in your wallet says, "In God we trust." So if it's in our founding documents, it's in our pledges, it's in our courts, and it's on our money, but we're not supposed to talk about it, what in the world is that? In medicine, they call it schizophrenia. And, you know, doesn't that explain a lot of what's going on in our country today? And we need to stop being afraid of who we are and what our identity is. We do have a Judeo-Christian foundation, even though President Obama says we don't. You know, he can do whatever he wants, but he doesn't get to dictate to us what kind of a nation we are. And we need to stand up. It needs to be of, for, and by the people. And the things that are done by our government should be about the people of this country, not the people of any place else. That is really the purpose of the government. They need to understand that. And, you know, there are those who say, well, Carson, he's an Islamophobe because he doesn't think a Muslim who believes in Sharia should be president of the United States. That has nothing to do with Islamophobia. That has to do with common sense. You know, what's wrong with common sense, you know? You think about it. Teddy Roosevelt probably encapsulated it best in the early 1900s before he died. He said, "We are a land of immigrants, and we welcome anybody from any country, any race, any religion, if they want to be Americans, if they accept our values and our principles and our laws. If they don't, stay where they are." You know, I think that should not be hard for anyone to understand. And, you know, that's one of the reasons that I've come out so strongly against CARE, you know, the Council on American Islamic Relations, who was an unindicted co-conspirator in the Holy Land Foundation trial, along with the Muslim Brotherhood and other organizations which are funneling money to terrorist organizations like Hamas. I've been waiting for one of those commentators to ask me how you pronounce it, because that's the way you actually pronounce it. It's not Hamas, it's Hamas. Anyway, you know, they've been funneling money to organizations like this. And, you know, what do? Invite them to the State of the Union address. Does that make any sense at all? Of course it does not. They need to be investigated. And, you know, what we're going to have to do is perhaps declare war on the Islamic State. And because they have certainly declared war on us. And, you know, we need to be looking at everything on a war footing, because we are at war right now. You know, one of the documents that was revealed during the Holy Land trial was an explanatory memorandum that talked about their desire to commit civilization jihad, basically to destroy us from within. And that our emphasis on political correctness would make it easier to do, because we would be so interested in protecting their rights that we would let our rights go down the drain. Isn't that what's happening in America today? That is absolute craziness. That's craziness. And the other thing to keep in mind is, what are we doing to our children? What are we doing to the next generation? You know, my entire professional career was spent taking care of children, giving them longevity and quality of life. And now, when I think about what's happening to them, look at the debt that we are accumulating. $18.5 trillion going on $19 trillion in national debt. Think about what that actually does. You know, the numbers roll off of our tongue. I was talking to a Democrat not too long ago. They said, "It's just a number. Doesn't mean anything." Really? I mean, think about some of the other pinnacle nations and what happened to them because they were fiscally irresponsible. You know, 17th century Spain and 18th century France. Think about ancient Rome, Greece. You know, what did it mean anything to them to be fiscally irresponsible? It sure did. It helped to bring about their collapse, and it will do exactly the same thing to us. But I want you to think in terms of what it does to the middle class and to the average person. A lot of people say, well, because we have so much debt, the interest rates have to remain low, because the Fed knows that if we raise the interest rates to a normal rate, instead of paying $250 billion a year in interest, we'll be paying $1 trillion. And we can't afford to pay that much. And therefore, so it is. And some people say, it's actually good because now I can buy a house for less money because the interest rates are low. No. Here's the real deal. It is destroying the American dream. Because part of the American dream used to be you would work for a few decades and you would have accumulated enough money to retire. And why? Because every Friday you went to the bank and you put 5 or 10% of your check in your savings account and you watched it grow. That's gone. Interest rates have been down near zero for almost a decade now. That part of the American dream, gone. Same thing with the bond market. The only people who can make any money are people who have risk tolerance, and that tends to be upper income people. They can invest in the stock market, although they're not very happy now. But anyway, but that's what causes the income gap to increase. It's not, as Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton would say, because of the rich people. It's because of the asinine policies of the federal government, which keeps driving up our debt and destroying our future. That's what it is. And then you look at the regulations. Now, regulations are actually taxes. And it's the most regressive form of taxation because everybody has to pay it in terms of the goods and services. Last year, we added 81,000 pages of regulations. Compliance costs of all these regulations, almost $2 trillion. Now, you want to break that down to the families. A family of 4, $24,000 per family. Think about that. That also happens to be the poverty rate for a family of 4, $24,000. Want to eliminate poverty? Get rid of all those regulations. That would make a lot of sense. And what we should be doing is we should be evaluating the regulations based on cost versus benefits. For instance, the President's Clean Power Plan. Now, that was evaluated by the EPA, and they said if we institute every aspect of it, it will lower the Earth's temperature by 0.05 degrees Fahrenheit in 85 years. That's the benefit. The cost is billions of dollars and millions of jobs. Does that make any sense? Absolutely not. That's what happens when policy is based on ideology and not on evidence. Evidence is what we have to utilize. In medicine, evidence makes a difference. I remember when I first started advocating cervical medullary decompression for achondroplasia. Let me interpret that. Dwarfism is the most common form of small people. And the achondroplasia is the most common form. And 7% of them used to die in infancy. And the reason they died is because the brainstem was being compressed by complex bony structures at the base of the skull. And when surgeons would go in and try to fix it, frequently it exacerbated it, made it worse, killed them or crippled them. And I remember when I first started talking about it, all the geneticists and everybody, they were just outraged. I talked about it first at a conference in Rome, and they were just, you surgeons are the ones who create these problems. You think you can solve everything. You're the ones who kill them. If you just leave them alone, only 7% of them will die. And then they continue to complain to the chairman of departments at Hopkins and the president of the hospital, the dean, the Maryland Medical Society, the AMA. You got to stop Carson. He's a madman. And but by that time, I had actually done enough cases that I could reveal the data. And not a single one of them had died. And that's the interesting thing about medicine and science. Data actually is paid attention to. It doesn't work that way in politics. But now, that procedure that we advocated is used all over the world, and achondroplasts no longer die at 7% during infancy. That's what happens. I've been involved in a number of controversial medical things, pushing the envelope. But it wasn't because I was smarter than everybody else. It was because I was humble enough to assemble a group of people, all of whom were experts in different areas, focus on a problem, and figure out how to get it done. See, that's the exact same quality that is needed in a president. You don't need somebody who thinks they know everything. You need somebody who knows how to utilize the tremendous resources that we have. That's what I have. We also need people who honor our Constitution. You know, I mean, it is an amazing document, and so much can be done. You know, you look at the First Amendment and how we're allowing it to be trampled on, you know, by an out-of-control Supreme Court. You know, these are things that we need to look at. You know, when federal judges and Supreme Court judges were first given lifetime appointments, the average age of death was 47. It has changed. We need to rethink this thing, you know? There's a question about that. And in the beginning, we didn't have term limits either. Why? Because nobody was going back. I mean, it was an onerous job. It was a real sacrifice. You were like, oh man, what is my time over? That has changed. And we need to be looking at term limits. One of the things I would do right away is start pushing for a national referendum on term limits. We need to do that right away. Yeah. And there, you know, when I think about the country that we live in right now, which I love so much, I'm thinking, if I were in charge of this nation and I was trying to destroy it from inside, I'll tell you what I would do. I would try to drive wedges between all of the people. I would have them all fighting each other and at each other's throats. I would have a war on women, race wars, age wars, income wars, religious wars, a war on everything imaginable. And I would make people think that if you didn't agree with somebody, that, you know, you should definitely make them your enemy. And then I would try to destroy the financial foundation of the country. I would drive the debt to amazing limits. I would invite people in here from other countries and give them all kind of benefits. And I would be trying to get the people in this country on all kind of benefits, all kinds of people on food stamps and SSI and everything possible. I would be giving people free telephones. I would be telling people that, you know, you can go to college for free. I mean, just get them thinking about all these things they could have and drive it crazy. And I would destroy the military. I would have the smallest Navy since 1917, the smallest and oldest Air Force since 1940, to the sequestration. I would gut the military in terms of personnel. I'd be telling the veterans how much I love them and would do absolutely nothing to improve their situation, so that 22 a day were committing suicide. I would absolutely fail to deal with important infrastructure like our electric grid. I mean, if we don't deal with the electric grid soon, we are going to be so vulnerable. And I would get us out of the space program, recognizing that a lot of our innovation came from the space program. One of the reasons that our military was light years ahead of everybody else are all of those innovations. Now they've all caught up with us. And in the future, he who controls space will control the earth. So, you know, that's what I would do if I were trying to destroy the United States. Now, any resemblance to what's going on, I'm sure it's coincidental, okay? But does that give you some idea of how much trouble we're in and why it is so important that we think now? We're at the precipice. If we go over it, we're in huge trouble. And the establishment and the political status quo will continue to try to do all the things that they have done before and manipulate the people and try to control the situation by who they talk about, who they don't talk about, how they present it. The question is, are we going to fall for it once again? Because if we do, what happens? It's also very important for conservatives to recognize that we cannot once again fall for this crap that they perpetrate. They say, you guys are so honorable because you are principled people, and you won't vote for somebody unless you agree with them on everything. And we admire you for that. And you should just sit at home and not vote. That's what they tell you in public. And in secret, they're just laughing their heads off because they know that they will win. Because if you don't vote, you are voting. And you're voting for the other side. And if we get them in there and they get 2 or 3 Supreme Court picks, our children are toast. We absolutely cannot let that happen. You know? And Thomas Jefferson, I think, was a genius, and he knew how it was supposed to work. And, you know, he said something. He said that we would reach this point in our country because the people would not be paying close attention. And as a result, the government would do what all governments naturally do. They grow, they metastasize, they infiltrate, and they dominate. But he said just before we turned into something else, the people of America would awaken. They would recognize what was going on. They would stand up, and they would retake control. And I say, please join me and make that happen right now. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Now, we have time for a few questions and some answers, yes. Well, you know, I've heard many people say, you got to be more bombastic, and you got to yell, and you got to jump, and you got to call people names and act like a buffoon. But you know what? I can tell you this. Throughout my medical career, I faced a lot of controversy. I faced a lot of opposition and still succeeded without being nasty. And I think we can do that now. Okay.
If you are president, you know next year that we'll be hitting $20 trillion in debt. How would you manage our money so our generation doesn't have to pay the price?
I'm glad you asked that question. Well, first of all, as many of you know, last week we put out our tax plan. And please go to our website, bencarson.com, and read about it if you haven't read about it already. As you know, many reputable publications and organizations have come out and said it is the best plan for growth. And that was the whole idea, a plan for growth, because we do need to cut. There's no question about that. But the way we're really going to solve the problem is with growth. And I want a flat tax, 14.9% on everybody, no exemptions, no deductions, no shelters, no loopholes, because as soon as you put those in, people start manipulating everything so that they can get into them. And some people have a much better ability to do that because they have fancy lawyers and accountants. I know a lot of people who are incredibly wealthy who pay a lot less taxes than I do. And I don't think that that's fair. I think everybody should have skin in the game. I started at 150% poverty level, but even the people below that still have to pay something because it doesn't make any sense for a large number of people not to pay any taxes but have a say in how much the other people pay. You know, that doesn't make any sense. And I base it on the concept of tithing because I think God is pretty fair. And he didn't say, if you have a bumper crop, pay me triple tithes, and if your crops fail, you don't owe me anything. And, some people say, but it's not fair. If a guy making $10 billion pays $1 billion, the guy making 10 pays 1, it's not fair because the guy who put in $1 billion still has $9 billion left. We need to take more of his money. Well, that's called socialism. I don't like socialism. It doesn't work. Also in our tax plan, there's no double taxation. No death tax, no capital gain. None of that stuff, your interest, none of that stuff gets taxed again. We get taxed enough. We don't need to have new inventions on how to tax our income. And that's the kind of thing that will encourage entrepreneurial risk-taking and capital investment. Those are the fuels for that economic engine. The other thing is, in terms of the size of our government, 4.1 million federal employees. That's way too many federal employees. Tens of thousands of them retire every year. I would not replace them. I would simply move people around to critical positions. There are 645 federal agencies and sub-agencies. I would bring in the head of each one, and I would say, cut your budget by 2 to 3%. There is 2 to 3% fat there. I guarantee you, if you can't do that, turn in your resignation. And I would also say, you must cut it in a way that the American people will not know that you have cut it. It would be very different than what happened with Obama a few years ago when he said, cut it in a way that the people feel it the most so that nobody will be talking about cutting again. Believe me, we have lots of room to cut. And also, I spent 18 years on the board of Kellogg, 16 years on Costco, as well as national scholarship programs and a bunch of other things, have learned how to do things efficiently. I can tell you something. Our government does not run efficiently. We need to run it like a business. And it will cost us a lot less when we run it like a business. And the rate, the flat tax will actually go down if we start running our government like we should. Well, rules of engagement. First of all, I would recognize that our military people are not dummies, to be dictated to. What we need to do is incorporate them. So, for instance, when it comes to taking the caliphate, I would consult with our military people, and I would say, what do you require in order to accomplish that goal? And then I would give them what they needed, and I wouldn't tie their hands behind their backs. I think that would make a huge difference. And, as far as our military is concerned, we're in trouble. 14% decrease in the number of people applying for our voluntary military. That's a real problem. But also, do you know that only 29% of people between the age of 17 and 24 can get into the military, can pass the requirements in terms of the physical, mental, and educational requirements? And the educational one being the worst, the one that's having a big spread. We are going to have to address this because it's going to come back to bite us very soon. And, we need to buff up our military. It is absolutely essential because if you don't get the military right, nothing else is going to matter. And who's got the, how about this lady over here?
Carson, regardless of what the polls say, I've been working on the ground now for 2 years, and I know that 1.2 million people signed a petition asking you to run for president. Those people haven't disappeared. They've turned into, they've multiplied exponentially. And everybody that I know that talks about you, we don't talk about your campaign, we talk about your movement, the movement of Ben Carson. And we're very, very happy to be representing you and to
Thank you.
encourage you. And we know that there's another debate coming up on the 28th, so we just want to tell you, smile and be yourself and go get them.
Well, thank you. It is.
Ben Carson.
it is interesting because in the last couple of weeks, I've spent a lot of time in Iowa, and every venue, standing room only. In 3 cases, we had to do double events because there were so many people waiting to get in who couldn't get in. And a lot of people, once they actually hear you, and they actually get a chance to see that you're not a stark raving maniac like the media tries to make you out to be, they change their minds. And it's really a matter of getting out there because, what the people of America have said quite loudly is that we don't want what you guys have been feeding us all this time. That's what's gotten us to where we are. And that's not what I want either. And but I do, and I have come to understand that a lot of the people in the establishment and a lot of the pundits and a lot of the media, they do not want to see someone like me. Because someone like me actually reminds them very much of Sarah Palin. And I'll tell you why. They tried to portray her as a dummy. It wasn't because she was a dummy. The reason they were afraid of her is because they saw what she did in Alaska. She put Democrats and Republicans in jail for corruption. You bring somebody like that into Washington, D.C., and it'll be a ghost town. So, and, by the grace of God, and that's the only reason that I am running, is because I believe that God is hearing the cry of many people in this country. And a lot of people have been beaten down by the secular progressives who don't care whether you agree with them or not, as long as you sit down and shut up, okay? And we have sat down and shut up for much too long. And, now it will require guts. It requires courage, because it's always easier to be one of the people and everybody pats you on the back and says, what a good guy you are. Everybody likes that. But see, we can't really afford that anymore at this point in time. So what I'm asking each one of you to do is the same thing that the Patriots did in the pre-revolutionary days. They had town meetings. They invited everybody. And they said, what kind of nation do you want to pass on to your children and your grandchildren? What are you willing to fight for? What are you willing to die for? And they encouraged a ragtag bunch of militiamen to defeat the most powerful and professional military force on earth. We must start thinking that way again. All of us know people who have not gotten involved. Your Uncle Joe, the drunk, who does nothing but drink beer all day. You need to go and talk to him and say, Uncle Joe, if you don't sober up and get involved, there's not going to be any beer. Make sure he understands that, okay? And, your elderly relative who is in a nursing home, I want you to go and make sure that they have an absentee ballot and help them fill it out if it needs that kind of help. Because we all have to get involved. We all have a sphere of influence. And if we, the people, are willing to stand up, we will take our country where it needs to be. Thank you so much.